she also had the moral insight and courage to resign from the U.S. Foreign Ministry over the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Prepare yourself for the privilege to hear one of the leading and most courageous U.S. peace activists.
Thank you very much, Joseph, and it's a real honor to be here and have this opportunity to speak to everyone here at the World Conference Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs. I bring you greetings and solidarity from the civil society movement in the United States, which has been working diligently for a nuclear-free world. And as this is a commemoration of the horrific deaths and woundings of hundreds of thousands of people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki 80 years ago, in 1945, as an American citizen again, I offer my profound apologies for the criminal actions of my government in using these weapons of mass destruction, and apologies to the Japanese, the Koreans, the Marshall Islanders, the downwinders in the United States, the Vietnamese for the Agent Orange and unexploded ordnance, and for the Palestinians that the U.S. is contributing with the Israeli genocide of Gaza. And that's why I have the kafia up here to say we have to stop the genocide. Apologies to the translators, but I'll just mention something else. I'm part of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla that has had 3 boats this year trying to break the Israeli naval blockade of Gaza. And the last one, we just now have our 21 persons on the Handala boat have finally all now gotten back to their homes, most of whom were in Israeli prison for several days. I acknowledge that the horrific weapons that were used to kill and maim innocent civilians as a strategy to end the war that was a brutal, reckless, and without any sense of humanity. 80 years later, we now know the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the testing of the terrible weapons in Nevada in the United States, in the Marshall Islands, in the Russian Federation, in Morora, in French Polynesia, in Australia, and in Algeria, have resulted in the legacy of genetic medical conditions for the generations that have followed those who were initially exposed to the radiation emanating from the testing of these nuclear bombs. Most of the test sites were in the lands of indigenous peoples and far from the capitals of the testing governments. Large swaths of land remain radioactive and unsafe for habitation even decades after the test sites were closed. And yet, 80 years later, we're still battling our governments as governments continue to spend trillions of dollars to, quote, improve, upgrade, and modernize these weapons that have been banned by the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons when it was open for signature in the UN in 2017 and entered into force in 2021. We know the statistics that by the end of 2024, now this has changed from here, that a total of 94 nations have signed the TPNW, but only 73 have signed and ratified the treaty. There are currently 21 signatory countries that have not signed, that have signed but not ratified the TPNW, countries in which their citizens must put pressure on their governments to get that treaty signed. Citizen pressure must be put on, and that these countries, that 44 countries oppose the country, including the 9 nuclear weapons countries: the U.S., Russian Federation, France, UK, China, India, Israel, North Korea, and Pakistan. 15 other nations are undecided on whether to accept or reject the treaty. In the United States, we have cities and states that are saying no to nuclear weapons. The state legislators out of, well, only 5 of the 50 states of the United States, California, Oregon, New Jersey, Maine, and Rhode Island, have passed resolutions in support of the TPNW. 5 large counties, which are almost like states, have passed resolutions in support of the TPNW, including the the city and county where I live in Honolulu, Hawaii, aloha, as well as the city and county of San Francisco and 2 counties in Maryland next to Washington, D.C. Dozens of cities across the United States, including Boston, Los Angeles, New York City, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., have also appealed to the U.S. government to sign and ratify the TPNW. In 2021, New York City resolved to pursue the divestment of public funds from nuclear weapons makers in response to the TPNW's entry into force. Now, let's go to the Japanese-American Congresswoman Jill Takuda, who is a co-sponsor of Stop the Nuclear Arms Race resolution. In 2025, in the House of Representatives of the U.S. Congress, Congresspersons Jim McGovern and Jill Takuda introduced House Resolution 317, urging the United States to lead the world back from the brink of nuclear war and hail and reverse the nuclear arms race. Unfortunately, the resolution has only 22 sponsors or co-sponsors out of 435. All from the Democratic Party, none from the Republican Party, meaning we, the U.S. citizens, have so much work to do in our Congress. And about House Resolution 317, Jill Takuda, my congressional representative from Hawaii, has said, and she's only one of 4 Japanese-American citizens who are in the U.S. Congress. She stated, "As a Japanese-American, my heritage is deeply tied to the devastating impact of nuclear weapons and the atrocities of war. This resolution is about our moral imperative to achieve nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. It's not only a call for peace, but a commitment to ensuring that such tragedies are never repeated. And this resolution represents a vital step toward a safer, more just world." And the resolution, and I'll read it because I think it urges my country, the United States, to engage in good faith negotiations with all nuclear armed states, to halt the buildup of nuclear arsenals, and pursue verifiable time-bound reductions. It urges to conclude a nuclear arms agreement with Russia and to engage China on nuclear risk reduction, to renounce the option of using nuclear weapons first, to end the Cold War era hair-trigger alert posture, to rein in the production of new nuclear warheads and delivery systems, to preserve the moratorium on nuclear testing, to protect radiation-impacted communities and workers through full remediation, compensation, and expanded health care, including an expanded Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, and to plan a just economic transition for workers and communities dependent on the nuclear weapons industry. Now, wouldn't that be wonderful if that got passed? But don't hold your breath. So I will want to send to you all the U.S. organizations that send greetings for the conference. There are a multitude of organizations in the U.S. and around the world that are working for these elimination of nuclear weapons. And we send our greetings to colleagues here in Japan and around the world as we continue our work in the U.S. Congress, in the states, in the cities and counties of the United States. Just to let you know, in June of this year, the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability held its 38th annual DC Days to advocate in the U.S. Congress for safer nuclear weapons and waste policies. It includes 30 organizations concerned with local and national consequences of nuclear weapons and waste policy decisions. During the week of advocacy in the U.S. Congress, meetings were held with 80 Congress members or their staff. And referencing the Trump administration's goal of eliminating waste in the federal government through the draconian measures taken by DOGE, the ANA published a new resource called What About Waste? 80 Years of Nuclear Waste, as a part of this year's effort in the Congress. Another initiative for public awareness in the United States in the bloated U.S. military budget and nuclear weapons program has to do with ice cream. How many of you all have ever had Ben & Jerry's ice cream? Yeah, everybody from the U.S. ought to hold your hand up. Okay. Well, Ben and Jerry, in June of this year, initiated a $2.3 million two-year advocacy project called Up in Arms. The campaign is to reduce U.S. military spending, particularly on nuclear weapons, to make cutting the Pentagon budget a debate in the 2026 elections, and to bring a national focus on the nuclear dangers and the necessity of armament. So it's good to have the ice cream people behind us, isn't it? Yeah. Another thing that we've heard about today, the International People's Tribunal on the 1945 atomic bombings continues to bring international attention and hopefully justice to the Japanese and Korean victims and survivors of the effects of the horrific U.S. atomic bombs in 1945. And we certainly acknowledge the testimony this morning of our wonderful colleague from Korea. The Lakenheath Peace Camp held in May of 2025 at the U.S. Air Base in Lakenheath, the UK, focused on stopping nuclear weapons being sent again by the United States to be housed on U.S. soil. These are events that have been held all over the United States and Europe. No NATO events were held in June in The Hague, Netherlands, to protest the 5% increase for NATO countries in national spending for their military at the expense of social programs for the people and to alert the world to the dangers of the use of nuclear weapons in any conflict. Following no to NATO was the International Peace Forum in Brussels, Belgium, which focused on the increased militarization in Europe and the necessity of eliminating nuclear weapons. Then, following that, it was a big week in Europe, the annual Stop Ramstein camp and demonstration. It was held in the largest U.S. air base in Europe, Ramstein, which underscored the need to challenge the continuing U.S. dominance in European security issues and the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Another thing that happened, I mentioned before, the Gaza Freedom Flotilla attempted to sail 2 ships in May and June to break the Israeli genocide and the illegal Israeli naval blockade of Gaza and the complicity of the United States and other countries in the genocide and the refusal of Israel to acknowledge its nuclear weapons. Now, what can we do as individuals? What can we do, civil society individuals? Well, in 2024 and 25, an 81-year-old U.S. citizen, Susan Crane, spent 230 days in prison in Germany for cutting a fence in the Buchel Air Force Base, climbing atop an earthen bunker used to store both nuclear weapons, and for the German Tornado fighter jets to protest the stationing of American nuclear weapons in Germany. And she was in prison for refusing to pay a fine. For 3 decades, she has protested nuclear weapons in the U.S. and Europe. She's poured her own blood on a nuclear destroyer and taken a hammer to warplanes. In total, she said she served around 7 years in prison for challenging nuclear weapons. At Buchel Air Force Base, they trained German soldiers to drop hydrogen bombs on behalf of the United States as a part of NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements. Another person, Susan van Hingen from the Netherlands and Gerd Botzig from Germany, were also put in prison in Germany for similar actions at the airbase. And more, and I'm just talking about U.S. peace activists, because there are lots of peace activists around the world that have been putting themselves on the line. But John LaForge, Dennis Duval, Susan, and Brian Terrell, all longtime Catholic workers and human rights people, work with the Nevada Desert Experience, and Brian served 15 days in a prison south of Cologne, Germany, before actually going into the nuclear bases again. And another citizen solidarity activism in June of this year, Veterans for Peace, of which I'm a member, held a 40-day fast at the United Nations and the U.S. and Israeli missions to the UN in New York City to stop the Israeli genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, as well as for a nuclear-free world. So, as we commemorate the lives lost and damaged by nuclear weapons 80 years ago, we must commit ourselves to work harder for the elimination of these weapons and taking on our own governments and industries that make money from the construction and testing of these weapons of mass destruction. So that's it, and free the world from nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for your call nonviolent fighting spirit. She didn't mention how many times she's been arrested as well.